So, the first scene that we get to see in the Invincible show is at the White House, where two men talk about having to get recertified in superhuman evasion training soon, and one of them mentions he doesn't like it. His colleague Steve tells him it is part of the job. He is indifferent about the upcoming training because he will be missing it. He is taking his stepson on a 2-week vacation to London for spring break. Steve's co-worker is curious about why Steve was excited to go, considering the difficulties Steve and his wife, Molly, experienced raising Matt. However, Steve mentions that Matt had pulled himself together and their problems were behind them now. He mentions that he never had a kid of his own, but he was proud to call Matt his son. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking and splitting. From underground, two supervillains known as the Mauler twins rise, but one complains that he should have checked his clone's calculations since they were supposed to be inside the building. The other one gets angry and complains that he is not the clone. They are shot at, but they are unfazed. Steve shoots one of the twins and shakily orders him to back off. The twin approaches him and Steve shoots him once again, damaging the twin's eye this time. Before he could kill Steve, the Guardians of the Globe approach the Mauler twins and order civilians to be evacuated while they fight. The twin whose eye was shot asks War Woman if she could not have sat this fight out and let them kill the president, but she tells him that it was not her style. The heroes help civilians evacuate while the Mauler twins break through the walls to make it inside. One of the twins throws a woman, so Darkwing catches her. However, when they fall to the ground, the twin throws a tank, which forces him to use his strength to protect them both from being crushed. He was not able to get them both out, so he managed to get the woman out using a grappling hook. When it appeared he would be crushed, Omni-Man lifted the tank and helped him get out. The Mauler twins kept on fighting the heroes, while they helped every civilian escape the White House. Soon it was just the heroes against the twins, who were swiftly defeated once they had no more civilians to distract the heroes with. Meanwhile, Mark Grayson was in the bathroom, calmly reading a comic. Soon, his mother walked in on him to grab soap, which annoyed him. Once they got downstairs, they watched the news, in which the Mauler twins' attack on the White House was reported. Mark told her that the Guardians were there as well, and Debbie mentioned that the White House was rebuilt very frequently at that point. Nolan makes it home and kisses his wife, who tells him that they should get him out of that suit. Mark complains that his parents should not talk about sex in front of him, but his mother tells him that he should be happy to hear them express their love. They mention they would be going to Berlin, which makes Mark jealous. However, his father tells him that he could go himself once his powers kicked in. Mark leaves for school and looks at his father fly away with his mother. He tries flying himself, but does not manage to do it, and instead gets embarrassed when he finds out somebody was seeing him jump up and down. At school, his friend William Clockwell was surprised that the Guardians had let the Mauler twins get that close to the president, but Mark points out that they had not made it inside the building and that Omni-Man was there too. William calls him an Omni-Maniac and teases him. He asks Mark if he wants to play a game, but Mark mentions that he has a job and tells him that comic books are expensive. Later, Mark takes out the trash at his job, which is not an easy task for him. However, when he picks up a second bag, he throws it very far and discovers his powers had kicked in, which makes him say, "It's about time." When Mark gets home, Debbie tells him that she has heated up German bratwurst for him. He tells her that he had an interesting day. Nolan makes it home and tells them he had been fighting a dragon in Hong Kong and gets ready to listen to Mark's day. He told him that he had been getting his powers, but his father does not react until Debbie kicks him. Nolan congratulates him and tells him that they would train the next day. However, Mark could not sleep and remembers when his father told him that he was from a planet called Viltrum and had great strength and could fly and move at super speed, and how he left Viltrum in order to protect Earth. He told Mark that things would start changing for Mark when he started puberty, which excited Mark. He leaves his room, convinced he will be able to fly, and jumps off his roof. He soars through the sky but nearly crashes into a plane, which sends him to the atmosphere and he starts losing consciousness. When Mark awakes, he finds he is close to the ground and crashes into the street. He wakes up next morning, very tired, and his father tells him they will train. Once they are in the sky, his father tells him he will get the hang of flying, having to focus at first. His father tells him that flying could tire him and to use momentum in order to relax from time to time. He told his son to relax and realized Mark had practiced the night before. He tells him to land, but Mark has a hard time doing so and eventually crashes into the ground. Nolan told him to hit him and to use his whole body while doing it, even practicing while flying. Nolan showed Mark how to punch and hurt Mark, which Nolan told him was part of his preparation. At home, Debbie reads, and sees Mark go to his room. She asks Nolan how bad the training had gone, and he says that he had pushed their son very hard since it was what he needed. She asks if maybe he had pushed him too hard, which makes Nolan very mad. Debbie asks him what had gotten into him, and he admits he did not know, but thinks that maybe their lives would have been better if Mark had not gotten his powers. The next day, Todd approaches Mark and puts him up against a locker, telling him he will hit him. Mark asks him to hit him as hard as he could, and asked him to repeat his punches when they did not hurt him. Todd gets visibly uncomfortable, calls him a freak, and leaves. Mark realized he needed something to punch in order to blow off steam and hears gunfire. 3 criminals run from the police after robbing a place. Mark fights the big criminal and manages to hurt him. Omni-Man approached him and told him he looked ridiculous, also mentioning that he had skipped a few steps since he had caused a lot of destruction. Mark asks his father to hit him since he was not ready before, but his father told him that he would not hit him. Mark grew desperate and told his father he knew that he did not believe in him, but he wanted to prove he was strong enough and wanted to be like him. Nolan hugs his son and tells him that he would be, then tells him to follow him. They fly to a tailor, where he tells Mark he would take him shopping for a suit. Art Rosenbaum greets Mark and tells him it was a pleasure to meet him, and gets Mark excited. Art hands him a suit, but Mark was not sure about orange and yellow and wanted something more iconic, which Art understands. Art told him that he needed a name from him so he could grab inspiration from there, telling him to let him know later. Debbie calls Mark, but finds he is not home. She hears a crash close to her, and Mark exits a small crater created by the impact. Mark tells her he was practicing his landings and apologizes for the destruction he was causing in the backyard, but also says that he needed to be better. However, his mother told him he needed to sleep since he had school the following day and she had to work. Mark told his mother to make him go to sleep, and she asked if the fact that she could not physically move him made him feel strong, and Mark simply said that what he was doing was important to him. Debbie asks him if he remembers his former bullies, and she tells him about drama in her life to make him feel better. She also tells him that she is still there for him, but now instead of them being together, he is more inclined to spend time with his father, which she understands. However, Mark says that he was nothing like his father and was more like her, asking her how he could ever live up to everything his father had done. She tells him he did not have to and only had to be the best version of himself. The next day, Nolan told Mark he seemed tired while they played catch while throwing a baseball around the world. Mark told him he was scared and was worried he might not be able to be a hero, but Nolan told him that it was the beginning of a long journey for both of them, and told him that it was okay to be scared but needed to push through. His father told him that kids his age believed they were invincible, but he actually was invincible. Feeling inspired, Mark rushes to Art's shop and tells him he has his name ready. Later, he sits on top of a construction crane with his new suit and flies through his city. However, as he did this, he saw a laser attack from the distance. Kilcannon, the super criminal shooting it, was being shot at by cops, but this did not bother him. Mark arrived at the scene and punched Kilcannon through several walls and through the street until the villain could not move. Standing victorious, Mark introduces himself as Invincible. Meanwhile, Olga tells Red Rush that he should be nice to Aquarius. He says he tries, but during the conversation, he rushes to fight a villain, which angers Olga since she feels she does not have his attention. Red Rush apologizes, but is called to fight once again, so he uses his super speed to rush to the scene. A man tells the Immortal that he will make Denver explode, so the Immortal throws him into space until he is called elsewhere. Aquarius was underwater sleeping, but was awakened by an alarm telling him there was action, which excited him. Connie tells Holly that with their third quarter rollout of Haven Storm, their market share could rise, but Connie mentions that what she wants is a spectacular year for the world until she gets called into action. She dressed as War Woman and left. At his house, Nicky is excited when a shapeshifter manages to expand himself beyond what he had ever done before. He gets called to action and leaves. At a photo shoot, another woman is called and she leaves as well. As two men try breaking into a building, they get scared about Darkwing, who had seen them. He attacks both of them and manages to bring them down easily, handcuffing them and asking them about their boss. He was called and told them he would check with them the next day before leaving in his jet. The heroes meet, but realize that none of the other Guardians made the alert. Red Rush senses the presence of Omni-Man and narrowly saves the Immortal from being decapitated using his super speed. Realizing his betrayal, the Guardians attack Omni-Man. Omni-Man takes a few punches from Red Rush before catching him by his wrist and horrifically crushing his skull while the other Guardians watch in shock and terror. Martian Man wraps himself around Omni-Man, and the remaining Guardians fight for their lives. Omni-Man continues to progressively overpower and further slaughter them, smashing Darkwing's head to pieces against the floor and driving his fist through Green Ghost's skull, who catches her colleague's corpse. He uses her body as a shield against Aquaris's attack and, after dealing with War Woman's heavy strike, kills him with her mace. An enraged Martian Man once again traps and subdues Omni-Man briefly while the two remaining Guardians, the Immortal and War Woman, batter him, drawing whole puddles of blood. Eventually, Omni-Man rips Martian Man's head to pieces, punches a hole through the Immortal's stomach, and breaks War Woman's neck. The last Guardian to live, the Immortal stares at him, still conscious, and weakly, yet decidedly asks him what drove him to commit the rampage. Omni-Man, without responding, decapitates him and, heavily injured, collapses himself in exhaustion among the remains of his betrayed friends. In England, Steve is with Matt, looking at the Queen's palace. All of a sudden, the trash bag Mark III falls from the sky, and Matt pushes Steve out of the way, calling him Dad. Steve is shocked by this, and Matt simply smiles, and the two hug each other. Meanwhile, the Guardians are dead, and Omni-Man lays next to them, injured as well. A door opens, and invisible agents look at the scene, followed by paramedics, who are shocked and disgusted at the scene. They find Omni-Man is alive, and they move the bodies out from the room. Cecil Stedman mentions he had never seen anything like it and bangs his fist against the table. Debbie Grayson wakes up and sees Nolan is not there. She makes herself a breakfast and takes a shower, later getting ready to go outside. Mark asks her what is wrong, and she mentions that Nolan has not made it home, but Mark says that he had probably gotten buried under a mountain. However, when Debbie opened the door, agents met her outside. At the clandestine Global Defense Agency, Debbie is told that the comatose Omni-Man was in their secret hospital. Donald tells her that they have a lot of technology, but Debbie says they are not interested in it all. They make it to Nolan's room, where they see Nolan lying without responding. Cecil introduces himself and tells them that they have no idea who did it. Debbie tells him that he has some nerve, but he tells them that the Guardians had been murdered and they were unable to bring them back, with Nolan being the only survivor. Cecil tells them that the news will eventually spread, but he wants them to know first. Debbie asks for materials and refuses to leave Nolan, mentioning that she had patched him up for 20 years. Donald gets a report that there was an undergoing attack with multiple casualties, and Mark leaves to go help out. When he makes it, he sees a big army attacking. He goes to where the tank is and tells them to stop, but he is blown back by an energy cannon, which kills several people. Invincible is intimidated and freezes until an old woman is shot at. He saves her and gets her out of the way, but not in time, as she is shot in his arms. He is shot at once again, but is saved by Atom Eve, who sets up a force field and defends him. Robot tells Eve that enemy tanks will line up to kill her and she takes care of it, while Robot keeps telling everybody else what is happening. Duplicate and Rex Splode continued attacking. Eve tells Invincible to take the old woman to a hospital since they had it covered. However, Robot said that it was possible they did not. The team started getting overwhelmed and was about to get shot at once again until the aliens started dying and leaving. Invincible storms into a hospital but is told to freeze by GDA agents. Paramedics receive her, and the agents mentioned Invincible was cleared. Later, Debbie finds Mark bleeding and asks if he is okay. Mark mentions he had tried being like his father and cried while his mother hugged him. At school, Mark walks down the hall, not caring if he bumped into anyone. Mark tells William that his father had gotten attacked and was really hurt. William wished Mark the best and told him he would support him. However, Mark interrupts him when he sees Eve Wilkins, who he said he needed to talk to. Mark walked up to her, he thanked her for saving his butt. Eve realized who he was, and Mark mentioned he was invincible, which Eve described as optimistic and said that everybody called her Eve. She said he looked like he needed to talk about what had happened, and the two leave. Mark tells her that he never connected the dots between her and her superhero personality, which she says is because of psychology. He mentions that he even follows Teen Team on Instagram, and she revealed that that was them, everybody's fourth favorite superhero team. Mark mentions he likes them more than Fight Force, and she agrees they are better. She asks him if he is new to the whole superhero business, and he reveals that he has just gotten his powers. She tells him that he had done well as a rookie, which he did not buy since people had gotten hurt and he had frozen, but she told him that he had helped people escape and revealed that she used to throw up before fights, but got used to it. Mark said that it just had not been what he had expected, and she confirmed that fights were not what they seemed on television. She tells him to meet Teen Team after school, and Mark agrees. Cecil tells Robot that they had done well, but had not achieved a victory since 338 people had died. Robot reveals that the aliens called themselves the Flaxons and had 6 ideas as to why they had left. However, he saw a tank that the Flaxons had used and noted that the alloy of which the tank was comprised should take years to corrode and oxidize, which meant that time ran faster where they came from. Cecil asks how Invincible has done, and while Robot thinks that he has a promise, he mentions that he seems unprepared. Cecil says that he would need his help and leaves. Cecil asks Donald for some good news, but he tells his boss that whoever had killed the Guardians had turned off the cameras and security systems. Cecil complains that what he had said was not good news and tells everybody to get out. He tells the demon detective Damien Darkblood to reveal himself. Darkblood looks around and tells Cecil everything he knows. Cecil tells Darkblood to have at it and let him know if he needs help. Amber greets Mark, telling him that she has found out he has gotten punched for her again. He tells her that it was a new strategy he tried, which was getting hit until Todd went home. He tells her he has to go, and she sees him meet up with Eve. Eve and Invincible fly through the city, and at one point, he worries that he has lost her, crashing into a billboard. They try flying again and fly through a bridge until a hole in the ground opens and Invincible meets Teen Team. When they get there, Rex makes out with Eve until he greets him, saying that they had won the fight without him, but Duplicate reveals that it had been because the aliens died. Robot greets Invincible as well as Duplicate. Robot tells the team about the Flaxons and asks Invincible if they can count on him to help in the future. He asks Robot if he is sure, but agrees later. Later, Mark visits his father, saying that even if he did not like being in teams, he found Teen Team to be very cool, except for Rex Splode. Debbie overheard Mark talking about Eve and asked who she was, but Mark said that nobody. He thanked her for the dinners she had prepared, and they talked about the side part of being a superhero. When Mark leaves, he walks into the room of the woman he had saved. The doctor tells him that her name is Maya, whose family now knows about her injuries. Mark asks if she would be okay, and the doctor says that it was too soon to tell. Mark tells William that he and Eve were just friends, so his friend tells him that it seemed he was jinxing his chances of ever going out with her, saying that everybody had seen him leave school with her on the last day. William tells him he is basic, but Mark looks across the cafeteria and locks eyes with Eve. Amber approaches William and asks him if he was dating Eve, and William only says he wishes he was. He took it back, but asked Amber if she wanted his number and wrote it down for her. Rex asks Eve and Invincible why they had gotten to the top of a building together, and Eve reminds him that they go to the same school and tells them that he had never gone to high school. Robot tells them to focus since the Flaxons are back, but this time it seems they have found a way to resist the time stream. Eve asks Mark if he is ready, and he unconfidently says that he is. Teen Team attacks the aliens, who are fighting with superior technology than they were. Eve was able to drive many of them back, but had something thrown to her face which covered it. Mark deflected beams thrown at him by cannons and was taken out by a kind of glue that did not let him move. Robot tells the team that the Flaxans seem to have used their time wisely. When the Flaxans' leader was about to kill Eve, Invincible let out a yell that blew everything at a certain radius away from him. He punched the Flaxan leader, who started aging once his bracelet broke and saved Eve. The team realized they had to destroy the wristbands, and the aliens started dying soon after, which forced them to leave. Rex told him that he took everything he had said back and congratulated him, followed by Eve. Mark got to the hospital and found his father was awake now. Nolan said that Debbie had told him that he was keeping the planet safe and wanted to hear everything. Mark went to Maya's room but found out she had died, which Nolan described as part of the job. When Mark left, Nolan demanded they give him his suit back. At training, Mark tried attacking his father, who at first was able to dodge his punches. However, when Mark landed one, he told him that he needed to be able to take one as well, and was about to punch him until Debbie interrupted. Cecil visited them and told them that they had seen somebody from Mars approaching Earth. Debbie refused to let Omni-Man do it, so Mark offered to do it himself. Nolan told him to knock some sense into the guy and send him back where he came from. So, Invincible went to space and was attacked from behind. Alan the alien communicated via telepathy and told him that he had shaved the mustache. Invincible told him to leave and sent him towards a satellite, which was thrown back at him. Mark was punched and teased, told that if he was protecting the planet, then he was sorry for their people. Invincible took a moment to breathe and made Alan realize that he was not the same person who had fought him years ago. Invincible sent him crashing into the moon, which only made him laugh. When Invincible told him he only wants to talk, Alan asks him if he is using his time out, which confuses Invincible. However, Alan mentions that he does not make the rules and grabs a rock for both of them to sit on. He tells Invincible that he is an evaluation officer for the Coalition of Planets, making sure that there was somebody capable of defending them. Invincible told him he did not know what he meant, but Alan told him that the planet Urath was on his list, which made Invincible tell him that he had gotten the planet wrong since they were on Earth. Alan commented that he was in trouble and introduced himself. Invincible presented himself, which makes Alan tell him that the name was optimistic since he believed he was pretty vincible. Invincible is left confused and goes to outer space. Nolan tells Cecil what he remembers from the night the Guardians were killed. He tells him that he had gotten a distress call from the Guardians, but everything seemed fine when he had gotten there. However, the lights had gone out and he fought against the enemy until he passed out. Cecil is not convinced and says that he had never seen Nolan lose like that, but believed that somebody was acting clever. People are setting up memorials for the Guardians when Flax and portals start opening. At school, Todd grabs Mark and apologizes, saying that he was sorry he had kicked his ass. Mark thanks him, and Todd tells him that Amber Bennett wanted to know if he wanted her number, which confused him at first, but agreed. Mark gets called and leaves school. The Flaxan army invades the city once again, and Robot tells Teen Team that the Flaxans are now immune to the time stream, and they should consider the city lost. He tells them that he will contact Cecil and request a nuclear response, but everybody disagrees. Invincible starts fighting the army, but is swiftly brought down and punched repeatedly in the face by the leader. Omni-Man arrives and starts defending the city, resisting all the attacks thrown at him and sending the enemies back where they had come from. However, when the leader looked up at Omni-Man once more, he punched him and went into the portal with him. Teen Team was shocked when they found out that Omni-Man was Invincible's father. Mark got home and told Debbie that Nolan had saved them from the Flaxans, but had gone into one of the portals. Debbie asks if he would be late for dinner, which surprised Mark, but Debbie reveals that she had been worried before because Nolan had never been hurt that bad, but taking on aliens was a normal occasion. Omni-Man told the Flaxans that they did not seem to understand that Earth was not theirs to conquer, taking them out and destroying their cities. When Nolan arrived home, he had grown a full beard. He was hugged by Mark and Debbie, and just then a news report came out, revealing that the Guardians were confirmed dead. People gather at the Guardians of the Globe's funeral, and Omni-Man prepares to give a speech. He mentions he has fought the unimaginable, but always knew he was not alone. He tells the people they had lost many heroes, but mentions that he would still defend them, as well as new heroes. He also reminds them that even in moments of doubt and fear, they should have faith and look to the sky before leaving. Mark Grayson asks if everybody had to go through a funeral again while looking at the graves for a second speech. He is told by Eve that the actual bodies were elsewhere, since people look for souvenirs later. Nolan tells the people gathered that the people who had died were his friends and mentors. He mentions that at least the fallen heroes would rest together, and Olga was upset that she could not see her late husband's body. When she threw herself at the ground, Debbie rushed to help her. When Eve asks him if he is alright, Mark mentions that he is unsure how to feel since it could have been his mother burying his father. Omni-Man spots Damien Darkblood, telling him that the ceremony was private. He complains that he never gets invited, but reminds him that he always showed up anyway, adding that he wanted to discover clues and catch the killer. But Omni-Man told him not to pretend to do it because he cared, knowing he only did not want to go home, and told him that he had already told Cecil everything he knew. Darkblood repeats that he knew Omni-Man had seen and heard nothing, having been left for dead. Omni-Man asked if he was insinuating something, but Darkblood said that he simply did not understand how to communicate like humans. Later, Cecil Stedman calls Robot and told him that he ran a mean superhero team. Robot thanked him, and Cecil offered him a job at the GDA so he could build him a new Guardians of the Globe, only answering to him. Robot asked if Omni-Man would not be the better choice, but Cecil mentioned that after a decade of trying to make him an official Guardian, he still refused to take orders from him. The Graysons make it back to their house. Nolan asked them if they want pizza, saying he could go to Naples and back before it gets cold, but Debbie asks him to let the delivery man take care of it. As Nolan tried watching television, all he saw was the speech he gave at the funeral while he changed the channels. Debbie asks Mark if he wants to call William, but Mark gets angry, asking sarcastically if she wanted him to buy comic books. However, his father told him that whatever had happened, he could not bring it home, stopping Mark on the way to his room. Mark asked him if he could go, and Nolan let him go, telling him they would train the following day. Debbie found it weird that he had just come home from his friend's funeral and was talking about pizza, and telling his son not to feel anything, which was odd. However, Nolan told her that they were co-workers and that was the life they lived. He told her not to worry and added that he and Mark could do more outside than sulking there. Across the street, Donald runs a team of people who hear everything that is being said inside the household. In his room, Mark looks at Amber's phone number and calls her. He awkwardly introduces himself, but she pretends not to recognize him and says that she did not know if he would call since he had a lot going on. But Mark tells her he thinks she is amazing and asks her if she wants to study with him, which she agrees to. Atom Eve makes it to Teen Team's headquarters, where she sees Duplicate, who was acting suspiciously after a shower. Eve takes a look inside the shower and sees Rexplode moaning and kissing Duplicate's twins, which makes her furious. However, Kate tells her that Rex had told her that she was now dating Invincible, which she says is not true. At the Pentagon, Robot and Invincible look at many heroes lined up, who will be selected to be the new Guardians of the Globe. However, Robot wanted Invincible to try out as well, but Invincible told him that his father wanted to train him himself. Eve faces a very strong man at the tryouts and defeats him quickly, showing a lot of anger. Invincible asks Rexplode what was going on with her, but he simply mentions he does not know. In the end, Robot introduces the new Guardians: Black Samson, Shrinking Ray, Duplicate, Monster Girl, which makes Rex laugh since she was small, but Monster Girl asks if there was not a dick size requirement. Rex gets angry and makes his arm light up, but she punches him with a huge arm before he could do it. She transforms into a big green human-like being and hits him once again. Rex gets angry and uses his powers, but his powers turn out to be useless against Monster Girl. As she punched Rex, Invincible stopped her and told her to cut it out, but was simply thrown in another direction. Angry, he flies in her direction and hits her so hard that she changes back into a little girl. He apologizes for having hit her, but she says that it is fine since she always got angry when called a little girl, also apologizing to Rex for her dick joke. Robot once again introduces Monster Girl as a guardian and tells them that Rex would also join once he recovered. After that, he mentioned that Atom Eve would be the last member, telling them that he would be announcing it publicly later. But Eve told him that she could not be on the same team as Rex and Kate and leaves. Invincible follows Eve and asks her what happened. Eve tells him how Rex cheated on her, saying that Rex had told Kate that Eve and him were going out together. Invincible admits that he believed Rex was an asshole, but Eve said that that had not always been the case. Robot tells the new Guardians that when forensic investigations are concluded, they would move into the Guardians' headquarters. He tells them their schedule, and Rex complains that their training was too early and they did not even need it. However, Robot tells him that they are no longer Teen Team, and Black Samson tells him he needs experience. Rex points out that if Black Samson had not lost his powers, he might have been able to help the past Guardians, which angers him. Black Samson tells him to watch it, and tells Robot they needed a leader they could look in the eye and not ones and zeros, saying that he could be the leader instead. However, Rex once again mentions that Black Samson had lost his powers and wondered why they needed to put up with him. Shrinking Ray points out that teams need teamwork, which Robot agrees to. Everybody leaves, and Black Samson congratulates Robot sarcastically. After everybody left, Monster Girl told Robot that she could not do 3 combat exercises a day, but Robot said he needed the team operational. Monster Girl tells him that whenever she transforms, she gets younger. Robot apologizes and sympathizes, but Monster Girl believes there was no way he could understand since he was a robot. From above, Omni-Man observes, describing what he had seen as pathetic. In Mark's room, William cleans it up, telling him what needed to go. He tells his friend that he had brought homework for him and told him everything Amber liked after asking around at school. Mark tells him that it was just a study date, but William told him that every date should feel like a first date. The doorbell rang and Mark threw all his dirty plates and clothes out the window. He greets Amber, who picks up a book William had brought. Mark nervously introduced himself as a comic fan. Amber asks what his favorite is, so Mark starts talking about them. Amber asks if she can borrow one, which Mark agrees to. Mark's phone rings and he hangs up, but he is called once again, so he turns his phone off. He is surprised when he is called yet again, so he picks up and Cecil pops out from his phone, relieved that Amber has left. Mark asks if Cecil has been spying on him, but Cecil tells him that if he wants to be a hero, privacy is not an option. Mark points out that he did not even work for him, but Cecil counters by telling him he never would if he never showed respect or decided if he wanted to be a hero. Mark is forced to decide then, and he says he does want to be a hero. Cecil hands him a comm device and tells him Eve would be there as well. Cecil tells him that he needs to go to Mount Rushmore, which Mark does not know where to find. Cecil complains that schools do not teach enough and leaves. Amber walks back in and Mark makes up a lame excuse to leave. As Debbie walked in with snacks, Mark smiled nervously and left. Soon, Invincible and Atom Eve flew toward Mount Rushmore. As they did, Cecil told them that he would not be asking for their help, but Omni-Man was busy and the new Guardians were a shit show. He tells them their target was Doc Seismic, who was doing things that made no sense, and they believe that the gloves cause him a concussion every time he uses them. Doc Seismic causes eruptions and causes Mount Rushmore to split. As Abraham Lincoln's face fell, Invincible caught it just in time before it hurt anybody, putting it back. Invincible and Eve fight Doc Seismic, who uses his bracelets to escape from them at a high speed and tells them that they should be on his side. Doc Seismic proves himself to be very strong and causes many people to nearly die if it were not for the two heroes. After Mark barely managed to save a group, Doc Seismic tried to attack, but his bracelets were damaged by Eve. Due to his faulty bracelets, Doc Seismic nearly fell into lava, but was caught by Eve, who in turn was helped by Invincible. Doc Seismic fell anyway, and Invincible jumped after him, not able to grab him in time after a big explosion. Mark quickly leaves and tells Eve they will talk later. When Mark gets home, he runs into Nolan, who tells him to slow down. Mark explained that he had left Amber in his room while he dealt with a crisis. Nolan congratulated him, saying that that was the hard part of the job, but reminded him he should change. Mark walked back into his room, and Amber angrily told him she had been there for an hour and asked why he had asked her to hang out in the first place. He asked her why she even came since she had only known of him when he stood up to Todd, but she reminds him that Todd had kicked his ass. She told him that she wanted to know the guy who had taken a punch for her. Donald tells Cecil that the monster that Omni-Man had taken care of was impressive since it was not an easy battle, and added that the beast might not be dead, and Cecil told him to put it on ice. As Debbie cooked dinner, Nolan threw a piece of the monster, asking if she wanted calamari. She tells him to get it off the counter while laughing and asks if he had called Cecil about putting some protection on the house, but he tells her he had been busy but would do it later. He told her that he was a badass since he had defeated a kaiju, and she told him that she was one as well since she had sold a house that had a double homicide. Meanwhile, Eve takes down her pictures with Rex and cries as she does so. When she goes outside, she sees fireworks and makes some of her own while smiling. She meets Rex, who tells her he knew he had screwed up, but did not know why since he loved her. He asks for a do-over, but Eve wishes him luck with his new team and leaves. Eve goes to Mark's house, only to find him on his bed with Amber, kissing her. She tells herself that that was good for Mark and flies away. At the GDA, a guard moves through various cells containing many monsters. He hands one of the Mauler twins chicken pot pie. He hands the other one the same, but Robot makes the food compartment open all the way, allowing the twin to grab the guard and knock him out, using his hand to break out. He goes to his twin's door, who is enjoying his chicken pot pie until he sees him. The one in his cell asks how he had done it, and his twin mentions that as the original twin, his intellect had not been affected by the cloning process. He asks him to open the door, but the other one mentions he will not until he admits he is a clone, which he admits to. They start running and are chased by guards, who leave after one of them receives a punch. In the desert, the two twins exit and look towards the city, but are shot at by a powerful weapon. One uses his twin as a shield and takes the weapon down. He looks at his twin and tells him that he would miss him, but could always make another one, and leaves him to die. Cecil asks Robot for an update on the team. Robot tells him that they have work to do, but he feels confident about what they have done so far. Debbie sits down while working in the kitchen when she gets cold. Her computer turns off and she faces Damien, who apologizes. She asks him what he is doing, and he explains that he was looking for clues since the massacre did not make sense to him. He points out that there had been 7 dead and only 1 alive, so he wanted her to help him since his answers had been unsatisfactory. She asks Darkblood why he cares, and he explains that he had escaped from hell and now seeks justice for others so he could save his soul. He leaves once Nolan turned on the light. After asking her if she was alright, Nolan felt the cold and knew Darkblood had been there, which he did not like. Bryant steps out of a truck in the middle of the desert and tells a worker that they are going too slow, but he tells him that the desert is unforgiving. The workers lift a rock and reveal a secret passage. Bryant moves everybody and goes down. When he makes it to the bottom, he walks to his master's tomb and brings him back to life, but shouts for help soon after. The workers realize he has resurrected Kahor and run off. As Kahor exits the secret passage, the big stone door falls on top of him. Omni-Man tells Invincible that he is messing up the desert since he is flying too low. When the latter turns around, he finds that he has created a big cloud of sand. Omni-Man tells him to build up speed and endurance by pushing himself, telling Invincible that being a Viltrumite was not easy. Omni-Man did a spin, and Invincible tried to follow, but lost control, so his father proposed going to Mount Everest, with the last one to reach it washing dishes for a week. Omni-Man reached Mount Everest first, and told his son to take deep breaths since the air was thin. A hiker reached the summit and was surprised to see them both there. Omni-Man tells Invincible that sometimes he forgets how beautiful the planet can be, and told him that Viltrum was very different. Having ended wars all over the universe, brought peace to thousands of galaxies, and lifted alien races out of the mud. Invincible told him that he could not believe he had left everything behind to go to a planet he had never even seen before, and his father told him that when his grandparents died, he had felt lost for a long time and saw going to Earth as a chance to build something new. He told him that Debbie changed Earth from a job into a home, but Invincible told him that he did not know if he could leave everything behind, and Omni-Man replied saying that being like them took sacrifice. He proceeded to tell his son that the last one home would take out the garbage for a month, but Invincible took off before he could finish and got a head start. Olga tells Debbie that nobody cared about them or Joseph, knowing how governments work. Debbie tries telling her that Cecil was searching for the killer, but Olga was not convinced and believes that they already knew who the killer is. She tells Debbie that she would be moving back to Moscow and asks her to sell her house, which she agrees to. Debbie asks Olga if Joseph had ever lied to her, and she tells her that all heroes do, but she only believed him once, when he told her everything would be fine. Debbie makes it home, grabs a bottle of wine, and starts working. She enters private browsing mode and looks up Damien Darkblood, who is described as a freak who could not even save his own soul, but turns out to be a good detective. She hears Nolan, Antoine, Mark making it back home. Once they enter the house, Nolan tells Debbie that after trying to get their son to break the sound barrier, Mark had finally done it by getting ready for a date, which Debbie did not know about, but Mark did not consider it a date and did not even plan it. Nolan asks Debbie if she wants to go out as well, but she tells him that she wants to sell Olga's house, mentioning the conspiracy behind the murders. Nolan tells her that Olga needs to quit drinking, which Debbie did not like and made her suspicious. Mark and Amber walk through a street, sharing a dessert. Amber tells him that she had volunteered to build schools in the Philippines, which made her gain perspective. She asks him if he has ever traveled, and he mentions that he had been to Mount Everest with his father. She asks him if he has liked Nepal or China, but he does not know how to respond, and changes the subject. Darkblood pours himself a drink and receives Nolan, telling him that he had wondered if he would come. Nolan tells him that he had been in his house and frightened his wife. Darkblood mentions that he had murdered 7 people, but Nolan tells him that perhaps it had been him, going to his house in order to finish the job he started, being a demon. Darkblood tells him that demons know evil when they see it, but Nolan ignores it and tells him that if he goes back into his house, he would not have to do anything, since people would believe him over the demon. Darkblood tells him that he would not give up, since the truth could not be hidden and his wife already suspected, wondering how long until his son did as well. Meanwhile, the Mauler twin opens a warehouse and gets to work by setting up a lab. He drills his arm until he gets blood and finds a cell which starts to duplicate. He puts it into a big pod which closes. He greets his brother and tells him that he must be hungry, giving him food. Robot is interrupted from watching the Mauler twin work by Rex, who welcomes him to the new Guardian's new digs. Black Samson mentions it is good to be home again, which annoys Rex since he does not enjoy hearing him say he was an original member of the Guardians of the Globe. Monster Girl tells Robot she is nervous, and Robot tells her that he is as well. Cecil walks in and tells them to not be surprised since it is their job. Rex tells him that he had missed a spot when cleaning blood, but Cecil tells them that he had left that there as a reminder and would get cleaned off when they proved themselves to be worthy of the heroes that had come before. He is radioed and told that Omni-Man wants to see him, so he leaves. Monster Girl asks Rex if they are cool, and he says they are since she had beaten him up in front of arseholes. Robot walks up to Rex and tells him not to let his personal life to meddle with his professional one, since it was his fault they were alienating Atom Eve and did not want it to happen with Monster Girl. Rex tells him that when he grew a pair, then he could tell him how to swing his. However, Robot mentions that he was giving him an order, patting him on the shoulder with a needle which slightly hurt Rex. Debbie works when Nolan approaches her, asking her if she wants to go to bed, but when she refuses, he asks what is going on, but she tells him that nothing. He tells her that being the wife of the most powerful man on earth means she should not have to deal with work, but she tells him that she is not just his wife and likes working. He tells her to be quiet, and at first she gets angry, but quiets down when she looks at his face. Nolan swiftly turns and grabs Cecil by the neck, throwing him against a bookshelf, but lets him go. Cecil apologizes and tells him that he meant to teleport to his front door, but had run into a problem. Nolan tells him that he had almost killed him, being jumpy for reasons Cecil would understand. Amber and Mark head back to the former's home. She tells him to plan the date next time, which he likes. The two lean in for a kiss, and Mark flies into the sky happily and heads back home. He finds Cecil and his parents talking about NASA's first manned mission to Mars and needs Nolan to shadow the mission so that nothing went wrong, but Nolan would not do it since he needs to train his son and was needed on Earth with the Guardians gone. Cecil tells Nolan that Earth needed a win, but Nolan tells him that nobody would care about Mars if there was an attack on Earth, saying that his priority was his family and the planet. Mark volunteers, saying that the same had happened last time, but Nolan tells him that that was the moon, which hardly counts as space. He added that his responsibilities were bigger than 4 astronauts. Cecil says that if Mark wanted to go, he would be doing a great favor, so Nolan asks Debbie for support. She says that she does not like Mark missing school, but it would be for a good cause. Mark says that he could go to Mars and back in a second, and Nolan mentions that the fact that he did not know how far Mars was exactly why he should go to school. Cecil tells Mark that it was a 2-week mission, and Mark agrees with his father, saying that he was not ready and had things going well with Amber. Debbie tells Mark that many people would tell him how to use his powers, but it would be up to him to make those decisions. After that, Mark agrees to go, so Cecil tells him to pack a lunch since he will be leaving the next day. Cecil teleports into the house in front of the Graysons, and Donald asks how Mark going would help them with investigating Omni-Man. Cecil simply responds that sending Mark would give them a chance to see what Mark could do and if his heart was in the right place. At school, Mark tells Eve that he did not want to lie to Amber, but also could not tell her the truth. Eve tells him that that was why dating normal people was not good, but Mark counters by saying that things between her and Rex had not worked out, which angered her. She tells him that she has a lot of things to deal with, so he asks her to help him out with Amber's stuff, and he would help her out with her stuff. However, she mentions that she does not know if she wants to be a superhero at the moment, so Mark tells her that he would be there for her if she needed to talk about it. She leaves, but turns around to tell him that he should only tell Amber his identity if he was serious with her. Amber watches the news, where the Mars mission is being broadcast, and hears the doorbell ring. She sees Mark with a big, expensive bale they had seen on their date. She thanks him for it and invites him in, but he told her that he would be gone for 2 weeks in order to volunteer, asking her not to lose interest in him while he was gone. They kiss, and he flies along with the Mars shuttle. In space, Cecil told Invincible that he almost did not make it, but needed him to stay out of sight unless something went wrong, and also needed him on the mission for the Martians, who lived underground and kept to themselves. Nolan and Debbie watched the news, and he told her that the mission was a waste of Mark's time, but Debbie mentioned she was proud. Nolan told her that Mark did not understand his responsibilities, but Debbie reminded him that he was 17, also telling him that he had been different ever since their son had gotten his powers. Nolan says that he is trying to teach him, but Debbie points out that he had been distant, annoyed at everything, and mean. She also adds that he had been talking about Viltrum, so Nolan told her that he wanted his son to know about his people, but she told him that she did not know about them, only hearing stories. She told him that he had been hiding something from her, and she did not like it. Nolan tells her that he never thought he would have a family, but met her, who he loved, but when he saw Mark with his powers, and after what happened with the Guardians, he did not want to lose everything. He told her that Mark would be gone for 2 weeks and asked her if she remembered their first trip. Invincible gets comfortable next to the spacecraft, but does not like it when he bites into his sandwich, which is completely hardened. Nolan and Debbie walk through Rome until they get to L'Osteria Donato, a fancy restaurant to which Nolan had made reservations, which Debbie mentions is new. Aboard the spacecraft, Invincible wakes up and sees Mars. They finally land, and he gets off before they do. The astronauts tell Houston they arrived, and one of them spots Invincible, but none of the others do, so he tells them to forget it, and they get to work while Mark looks at pictures of Amber, mentioning that the mission sucked. When his phone dies, he wonders if the astronauts have a charger in the shuttle, only to find out the astronauts had been taken away. Nolan and Debbie reminisce about the past, remembering how Debbie had dumped him after the first date because she considered him to be a dick. Nolan told her that he had taken her to Rome, but she reminded him that he expected her to worship him for it, so he told her that he had been new to Earth and gotten better. Debbie tells him that he had only gotten a second date due to him saving kids, and was happy they were there. However, Nolan sensed that she still felt something was wrong, and she admitted she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Nolan tells her that he had not been honest with her about the murders, mentioning that Cecil believed he had something to do with the murders since he was not human, was the only survivor, and had never been liked by Cecil. Debbie tells him that he needed to talk to him, and Nolan tells her that he had tried, but needed her to trust him. A dragon shows up, but Nolan does not move, simply asking Debbie if she trusted him. She tells him she does and begs him to do something about the dragon, to which he simply responds that he was on vacation, so Cecil should handle it. Back at the Graysons, an orchid freezes as Damien Darkblood shows up and looks around. He takes notes and sees Cecil is there as well with cops, who point guns at the demon. Cecil tells Darkblood that Nolan had warned them about him. Invincible remembers that Martians live underground. He lifts up a big rock and is attacked by many sequids. He throws them away and walks through the hidden hallway. There he finds a crystal-like object which turns out to be a Martian. He turns out to be surrounded and is ordered not to move. Invincible tells them that he was not there to hurt anyone. Another sequid jumps at him, which he quickly pulls off and throws away. Invincible tells the Martians that they should keep their dogs on a leash, but they are surprised that he was unaffected by the sequid, though Mark sarcastically tells him that he was very affected by them. The Martian then asks Invincible if the other humans were like him. Mark is brought to the Emperor of Mars, where he is welcomed. He awkwardly greets the Martian and tells him that he was sent to protect fellow Earthmen on a mission to Mars and needed them to go back alive. He tells him that they should get going and suggests that they should keep their squid dogs under control. The Martian tells him that the sequids were the very reason why the humans were captured, since they were a world-destroying race, who left a trail of destruction across the universe before crashing into Mars. He explains that alone, the sequids were scattered and weak, but with an appropriate host, they were unstoppable. He adds that the Martians' shape-shifting abilities allowed them to resist the sequids, but if just one of them got to the humans, they would be able to rise up, savaging Mars and Earth soon after. The Martian asks Invincible how he is able to resist the sequids, and he explains that he is half Viltrumite, which the Martian mentions he had heard of. Invincible explains that Viltrums liked to help people, so he should take the crew members home, but the Martian refuses, saying that the humans were scheduled for immediate execution since they could not risk them coming in contact with a sequid. Invincible claims he understands, and the scene cuts to black. Invincible and the astronauts are then seen fleeing from the Martians back to their spacecraft. Invincible gets the astronauts back into the spacecraft and they hurry up while Invincible faces off with the Martians. Invincible attempts to fight the Martians, but is outnumbered, so he lifts the spacecraft off of Mars's surface, helping the astronauts escape. With the astronauts safe, Invincible lands back on Mars and asks the Martians if he could take a rock, much to their apparent confusion. However, in the spacecraft, a Martian disguised as one of the astronauts noticed the flag symbol on his suit was upside down and quickly fixed it. On Mars's surface, and after Invincible had left, the Martians turned to face the astronaut who had been replaced and saw he had been taken over by sequids. The possessed astronaut unleashes a wave of sequids on the Martians as their invasion of Mars begins. On Earth, news told the success the astronauts had on Mars. Mark arrives home, hearing noises in his house, but when opening the door, he sees his parents awkwardly staring at him. Debbie asks him how Mars had been, but Mark tells them that less eventful than whatever had been going on in the house while he was gone. Mark greets Amber at school. She kisses him and asks him how it was, to which he responds that it was boring and a few other details. Amber pointed out that his story was not very specific, but Mark tells her that he got her a rock, which she does not find very impressive. He tells her not to show it to any geologists, and she thanks him for the rock. At the Pentagon, Cecil and the officers take Darkblood through a hallway. Cecil told him that when they had searched his office, they had found dried blood. He tells him that it was planted since he did not try to kill Nolan or the Guardians, though Cecil tells him he knows, but says he has to excise him anyway since he had not dropped the case when he told him to. Darkblood claims that Cecil cannot since he had destroyed the book centuries ago, but Cecil reveals that he was able to reconstruct it. Donald starts the ritual, which surprises Darkblood, saying he never thought Cecil would protect Omni-Man. Cecil exclaims to Darkblood that his demons can only see good and evil, black and white, and that he instead needs to keep things grey in order to figure out why Nolan had killed the Guardians and how to stop him. An angered Darkblood claims that there is a worse place waiting for Cecil than hell. However, Cecil remains unfazed as Darkblood is grabbed by chains and taken back to hell. Debbie cleans up Olga's house, finding it to be a mess. She looks at a picture of her and Joseph and keeps going. She shows people the house, but keeps looking at the picture. Robot approaches a deformed human, his actual self, and shows him the sample of Rexplod's blood. Robot then exclaims that Phase 1 had begun. Two men smoke, but are confronted by Titan, who turns himself to stone and enters the secret operation they were covering. He defeats everybody, and tells the man in charge that if Mr. Liu was on their turf again, he would be less gentle the next time, but snaps his neck and tells another kid the message was for him. At school, Mark greeted Amber, but she ignores him since he was 20 minutes late. Mark explains that he had gotten a cake for her and stays behind, but she drags him with her. At a fire, Titan makes it even worse by throwing gasoline inside. He is confronted by a man, so he gives him some money and tells him where he could go until he got a new place. Invincible fought another villain and threw her through a building, knocking her out, then thanked the crowd who celebrated. However, there was integrity damage done to the building, making him catch it. Later, his boss Mr. Sayer yells at him for being late once again, so Mark quits. Titan accepts money from a man and spares his life after seeing he has a daughter. Invincible, an Omni-Man fought a villain who they wanted to talk. Omni-Man taught him how to scare villains and dropped him but caught him later. Mark rushes to school and is told that if he wanted to go to college, they needed to discuss his attendance issues. Titan breaks into a lab where he gets a chip, telling the guards that if they wanted to live, they should not shoot at him. Later, Invincible cancels a date with Amber via text since he was fighting a villain. Titan reached his boss, Machine Head, and handed him the chip, which he put in his head. He tells him he is done working for him, but his boss refuses, telling him that he only served to break heads and would work for him until he said so. Titan angrily breaks the boss's desk, which the latter mentions proves his point. Mark attempts to stop an asteroid heading for Earth and manages to do so successfully, throwing it back into space. After a huge effort, Omni-Man tells him that the asteroid was small, which shocked his son. Later, Mark gets to Amber's home and apologizes for getting there late. He tells her that the food was great, but she tells him that dinner had been 2 hours before and asks him if she was important to him since he was bad at showing up. Mark apologizes and says things are not easy, but she tells him that she will not go down that road again. He is able to get one last chance and leaves. As he walks down the street, he is called by his father, who tells him the elephant was robbing a store and he reluctantly goes to help. Titan enters his apartment and hands his daughter a dessert. His wife asks him if he was out and is disappointed to see he still works for his boss. From their terrace, his daughter spots Invincible carrying the elephant. He tells her that people say Invincible is good and tries to be a good person himself. Debbie gets cold in her closet and finds Darkblood's notebook, which she reads in the bathroom, confirming her lingering suspicions. Eve is berated by her parents, since the only reason they had allowed her to become a superhero was because Rex was there to protect her, but she tells them she could take care of herself, and that team was gone. Her father tells her that she could not be a superhero alone, but she leaves. Invincible races through the sky and spots his name on a rooftop where he meets Titan. Invincible remembers him and calls him a criminal, but Titan tells him that he does not even know the meaning of the word. He tells him he only needs a little money and asks him to help him take down his boss, who ran the city. Invincible tells him he only does big picture things, but is convinced to see what happens in the real world. Titan shows Invincible who Machine Head is and explains what he does. Titan tells him that if he helps him take Machine Head down, he will help real people. When Invincible asks why he had accepted money in the first place, he tells him that it had not been for him. At dinner, Mark tells his parents that he can take down Machine Head, but Debbie was not listening. After Mark's explanation, Nolan tells him that he would be making a huge mistake because he was being used and that the problem was beneath him. Debbie tells Mark that sometimes people are not who they appear to be and adds that helping someone was never beneath him. The new Guardians of the Globe celebrate a victory against the Lizard League. They all celebrate with beers except for Robot and Black Samson, who emits a high frequency which shatters their bottles. He tells them that people were in the hospital because they had not fought as a team. They go through the fight and Black Samson lectures them on what they could have done to save lives, but Rex was unhappy and tells him they had done their best and won. Debbie asks Nolan why he would tell Mark that saving lives was beneath him, to which he responds that Mark did things on a bigger scale, and she did not understand that. She reminds him that when he had first arrived at Earth, he knew nothing about humans, and she had taught him how to be a superhero for Earth. Nolan tells her that he believed Mark was trusting someone he should not, instead of listening to them. After class, Mark complains about a test, but Eve tells him it is important. When Mark asks if she was okay, she tells him she has left home and does not know what she's doing. Amber joins them and asks Mark if he will be joining her. Mark tells her he would, and Amber tells Eve that Mark had volunteered to help at the Beckwell Community Center, where they cooked dinners for anyone who was hungry, which impressed her. After Mark left, Amber invited Eve, who tried to excuse herself but could not since she was no longer busy saving the world. Before she left, Amber asks Eve if she had seen Mark acting weird since he was always late and did not show up at times. But Eve defends Mark, telling her that even though Mark is bad at time management, he is a good guy. Titan tells Mark about Machine Head's security, but Mark is not convinced since Isotope, Machine Head's teletransporter, could make him disappear, but Titan mentions he took care of Isotope. They agreed that once Machine Head was taken down, he could be taken to the GDA. Mark asks Titan about his daughter and is told that Fiona's second home was Beckwell Community Center. At the Mauler twins' lab, the clone is ready and is taken out of the pod. They both lay down and their heads are shocked. When the shock ends, the newly made twin welcomes the twin who made him into the world, calling him the clone. As they argue, Robot says he would never understand why they did that. The twins attack him, but stop when he stands on top of the replication chamber. Robot explains that he needs their expertise in tissue regrowth and DNA replication, telling them they would be rewarded. Debbie calls Nolan, asking him to get food from Rome and wine from Provence. When Nolan leaves, she checks the house and finds the air vent has been moved. She also finds a bag, but hides it as Nolan comes back. Titan and Invincible break into Machine Head's building, but when Invincible confronts him, he does not move. Machine Head reveals he knew they would come thanks to the new chip Titan had gotten. Isotope also reveals himself, which surprises Invincible. Machine Head accepts he is out of his league, but mentions it is a good thing he had money, so he could afford many supervillains, which Isotope teleported into the room. Eve meets Amber at Beckwell Community Center, where the latter shows her around. When Eve asks if Mark was there, she is told that he had 15 minutes to be there, or he would be dumped. Eve is handed an apron and is put on chopping duty. Invincible and Titan fight the supervillains, but are overwhelmed as Omni-Man watches from a distance. Invincible is electrocuted while Titan is burned. After a sudden burst of energy, Invincible tells them they would die and swiftly kills two before having his head shoved into the ground by Battle Beast. As he tries getting up, he is thrown once again. Machine Head celebrates, but mentions he was getting a signal as the Guardians of the Globe show up. They mentioned that Cecil had gotten an anonymous call and would take it from there. Machine Head tells his supervillains to kill the Guardians, and they swiftly defeat them. Battle Beast mentions he believed Earth had worthy opponents and told Invincible that killing him would be an act of mercy. Black Samson tries to shoot at him, but fails, and Invincible is struck in his stomach and stops responding. Black Samson gets up and runs toward Battle Beast, who rips his hand from his wrist and throws him, cracking his head. Monster Girl tries to defeat Battle Beast as well, but is also swiftly defeated. Robot shoots at him, and while the Guardians looked at their fallen friends, they told the supervillains that they had messed up. Working together, they share an intense encounter with the villains and defeat them, except for Battle Beast, who says there was no honor in killing insects and leaves. Robot holds Monster Girl after seeing she was badly injured. Machine Head describes the events as strange and asks Isotope to get him out of there, but finds he does not respond and is hit by Rex. Mark awakens, and Titan tells him that he did not mean for things to turn out the way they did before leaving. Amber and Eve pour soup for everybody, who Amber knows. Eve tells her that being so involved was impressive, but Amber says that she had thought Mark would be there with her. GDA doctors look at Mark and mention he was losing too much blood. Cecil arrives at the scene and is horrified by what he sees. He tells the doctors to save him since they need Invincible, but also tells them to get a blood sample just in case. Machine Head is dragged away, but before he leaves the room, Cecil opens his head and takes the stolen chip. Mark calls for his father and shuts his eyes while the doctors mention they were losing him. Eve receives a phone call telling her about Mark, so she tells Amber she needs to leave. She tells Amber that Mark loved her and would be there if he could before leaving. Robot comforts Monster Girl and tells her he would fix her. Nolan arrives home as Debbie takes a phone call. Isotope teleports himself into Machine Head's office and congratulates his real boss, Titan, on what he had done. Titan tells him that he had told Invincible the truth as he would make the city better. Meanwhile, Donald goes to the lab where he is told that Viltrumite cells just would not die. 3 girls are approached by a drunk boy who tells them he is Doug Cheston, son of the owner of Cheston Pharmaceutical and half the university. They realize his father had elevated prices on medicine, but he tells them that he would inherit everything soon, offering them 4-way sex, but they refuse in disgust. He is attacked from behind and put to sleep. When Doug awakens, D.A. Sinclair tells him that he will be turned into a brave explorer. Doug calls him a nerd, but he finds he is bound and trapped in a basement with multiple cyborgs. He looks at his arm, which is now half human and half robot, which surprises him. Since he did not stay quiet, D.A. Sinclair cut his throat and removed his vocal cords. Invincible, Monster Girl, and Black Samson are rushed into the ER. Monster Girl was drowning in her own blood and was intubated, but as they took care of her, she turned into the monster. Robot walks in and tells them he had studied her physiology, which meant that if they got him out of the room, she would die. He tells them that Monster Girl's only hope would arise if they triggered her healing abilities. Black Samson was fibrillating, but they did not manage to wake him. Much to their surprise, he suddenly started emitting light waves, which caused energy surges, but also gave him a heartbeat. Invincible has a hole all the way through him, so doctors work on him as Debbie and Nolan make it to the ER. Mark finally woke and saw his parents. Nolan tells him he knew he would pull through and tells him he was out for 6 days, which shocks Mark. Eve tells him he covered for him with Amber, telling her he had gotten hit by a bus, and mentions Monster Girl and Black Samson were still unconscious. Nolan asks Cecil if Darkblood had cracked yet, but Cecil tells him that Darkblood is stubborn. When asked if Darkblood had murdered the Guardians, Cecil says that they do not know, but he wonders why he would even do it in the first place. Omni-Man tells him that Darkblood is a demon. Cecil asks if Mark had not told him that he would be taking on Machine Head by himself, and is surprised to see Mark does not listen to Nolan, which is normal for teenagers from Earth. In Amber's room, she tells Mark he did look like he had been run over, but did not like that she could not visit him. She feels guilty that she had basically dumped that night. He asks her if he remembers the first time they talked, which was awkward at first, but she had given him another chance. He asks her if they could start over once again, which she accepts by faking a phone call with him. At school, William tells Mark that he needs to look both ways before crossing the street. Mark says they should hang out and tells him they should watch a movie, but William tells him that he will be going for a tour of Upstate University that day with a boy he likes named Rick. Mark asks if he can go and bring Amber, saying he needs it. In Mark's room, Eve pays him a visit. He thanks her for talking to Amber when he got hurt and hugs her. He tells her he will be visiting Upstate University and invites her, but she mentions that she will not be going to college since she wants to help people by actually helping them. Mark understands, which surprises Eve, but he tells her that he had messed up when Black Samson and Monster Girl nearly died because of him and wonders if both of them need a fresh start. Debbie calls Mark, telling him that William and Amber were there, and Eve leaves. William, Mark, and Amber get into William's car and leave. Amber asks William to tell her about Rick, who William is excited for her to meet. He tells her he is incredible and does not stop talking about him, which annoys Mark. Nolan asks Debbie if she will be going out, and she tells him that she needs to pick up some dry cleaning and something for dinner. Nolan offers to come along, but she tells him that he needs to work on his book and leaves. When she is gone, Nolan opens up his bag and finds his suit was gone. At Upstate University, they greet Rick, who helps them with their bags. They look at Rick and William mentions it would be a great weekend. Eve's mother asks why Eve could not do her superhero work from home, but she tells him that she knew why, as she made the door disappear on her father. Her father comes from around the back and tells her that he would not allow it since she would die, and tells her that the worst day of his life was the day she got powers. Eve leaves, and her father orders her to go back, but she leaves. Mark mentions that the place was great, and Rick tells them he had arranged for them to see what a biology class looked like. On a kiosk, a missing poster looking for Doug Cheston was posted. At the class, a professor gives a biology class, but D.A. Sinclair does not agree with what he has to say, and tells him that all human failings were simply engineering challenges, and tells them that they were all machines. Amber tells him he was being a jerk and says that what he had told the class was dramatic. D.A. Sinclair walks up to them and tells Rick that he did not belong in a school of idiots. He calls Rick impressive and is asked to leave by the professor. Eve flies and builds a treehouse at a place that she likes. On campus, William tells Rick that D.A. Sinclair had been checking him out, which must be normal for him, but Rick says he simply needs friends. Amber asks Mark if he is okay, and he says that he is happy. Rick tells them that they could wander around the campus, and they start looking around. After a while, Mark tells Amber that he likes it there and wanted to go to the school with her, but she tells him that if he wants that, he would need better grades. When Mark tells her he is serious, they lean in for a kiss, but are interrupted by William and Rick, who grate them. All of a sudden, there was an explosion, and from it came a cyborg who started attacking people while holding his head. When the cyborg grabs Rick, William throws soda cans at it, so it attacks him instead. The cyborg is choking William and is about to kill him. Amber calls Mark, who disappears and returns as Invincible, stopping the cyborg's fatal blow. Since William was dropped, he looks up at Invincible and recognizes Mark, who simply told him to run. After that, Invincible and the cyborg started fighting for real. Invincible was being choked until he manages to lift up the cyborg's mask, which angers the creature, and it throws him away. The creature looks at himself and screams in horror, killing himself. Mark rushes to William, who is in shock, but Mark asks him to calm down and leaves. Rick walks up to William, who tells them he is in shock. Rick hugs him, thanking him for having saved him, which William likes. Mark walks up as himself and tells them that the police were on their way. When asked by a furious Amber where he had been, he tells her that he had run for help, but she did not believe him. She tells him that both she and Eve had been wrong about him. D.A. Sinclair is furious and mentions that would be the last time that he would leave anybody's frontal lobe intact while looking at Rick. Eve looks at her phone and flies away, saying that she needs to make a world she wants to live in. At the GDA, Robot walks into a room, telling doctors that the levels they were seeing were normal for Monster Girl. He tells them he had sent a clone to the Arctic and had gotten a cerulean cosmos, which he believed would add 6% chance to her survival. He walks up to Monster Girl, and Samson from the other room saw he really cared for her. Robot tells him it was good to see him awake and explains that he was programmed to care for all humans, but he reminded him that he did not go to the Arctic for him. Debbie visits Art Rosenbaum, who tells her the news was not good. They look at Nolan's suit and find traces of War Woman's armor, parts of Aquarius, slashes from Darkwing, and friction burns from Red Rush. She tells him that only proved that the Guardians and Nolan had fought, wondering if maybe they had attacked him first and was trying to protect their legacy. However, Art explains that blood begins to oxidize when exposed to air, and saw that the oldest trace of blood on the suit was on Nolan's wrist, meaning he had struck first. Debbie asks him not to tell anybody, but Art mentions he was too scared to do it anyway. From outside, Nolan looks angrily. The ride back from Upstate University is silent, as Amber does not want to listen to Mark. Eve makes herself some coffee in her treehouse and browses through her phone while looking at the view. Debbie wakes up and goes downstairs where she sees Nolan. She asks him why he had kept his suit, and he tells her that he used it to take care of Damien Darkblood, but suggests that maybe he wanted her to find it, and tells her that he wanted to tell her months ago since he was not blackmailed. He asks her to trust him, but she says it is impossible since the Guardians were their friends. Nolan says he did not have a choice, so she tells him to get out of her house. He storms out and tells her they would talk later. Debbie calls Mark, but he does not pick up. Soon she is surrounded and Donald tells her to go with him. Amber says goodbye to William and tells Mark that she did not want to put up with his bullshit anymore. As Mark was about to tell Amber he was invincible, she shut the door, but Mark flies up to her bedroom as Invincible and explains why he was always late. However, Amber already knew and she tells him that he lied to her and does not trust her, so she tells him to leave. Monster Girl is welcomed back by the Guardians, who hug her. Rex tells them all they should party, handing her a milk carton that has beer in it. Monster Girl asks Black Samson how he had recovered his powers, and he tells her he thinks it was because he was putting up with Rex. Robot tells her he is glad she had recovered and that he would never let her die, but repeated the word die many times, which the Guardians in shock. The Mauler twins get a delivery by a hologram. When the truck opens up, Robot walks out and tells them to step back. He unveils the real robot and asks to see their work, which he finds satisfactory except for a few details. He tells them to implement some fixes so they could discuss their payment, but the Mauler twins want to talk about the payment first. Robot tells them what he would give them and they get to work. Mark and William sit in the latter's car eating fast food. William wonders if Rick would ever go back to normal, and Mark tells him Cecil would get him back. William tells him that if he had been helped right away, nothing would have happened to Rick, which Mark recognizes. William mentions that because Mark was a superhero, he had barely seen him in the last 6 months, but Mark tells him he was not invincible anymore because he was a bad friend and boyfriend, saying he should have listened to his father, who he reveals to be Omni-Man. Mark starts sulking, but William tells him his truths, but Mark asks for sympathy and says he would talk to someone else. Debbie makes it to the GDA, where she asks Cecil why he had kept Nolan's secret from her. Cecil tells her that he could not risk Nolan finding out they knew until they knew what he was doing and how they could stop him. He says that there might be only one person who could fight Omni-Man. He asks her where Mark is, but she tells him it would not happen. Omni-Man practices how to tell Mark he had killed the Guardians, saying it was his responsibility. Confident Mark would understand. He says he would say something that would change everything. The Mauler twins work on Robot, who tells them he wanted to change his appearance because he had met someone. He leaves his pod and tells the Mauler twins to hurry with him since air was toxic to him. They put a mask on him and place him on a bed so that the copy of his mind would start on the new body. The cloning process begins, but they run into some problems because his brain is different. The machines explode, but the process is completed in the end. Rudy gets up and does not recognize if he was the clone or the original. He mentions he did not expect a feeling of continuance. The Mauler twins explain that not knowing who the original was part of the process, but Robot's process appeared to have taken care of himself. Rudy tells the original he was sorry that it had not been him, but is told not to worry and be happy, changing the world. The clone cries and lets the original die. The Mauler twins ask for their payment, so Robot gives it to them and tells them it is time for them to return to prison. The Mauler twins realize he is serious, but is only a teenager, but Rudy tells them that he is a 30-year-old genius in a teenager's body with a neural link chip, which allows him to summon many robots. The Mauler twins take care of the normally sized robots until a bigger one emerges. Nolan looks for Mark in his house, but finds nobody except a GDA agent, who he grabs and slams into the ground. He is shot at by many of the agents, who he kills swiftly. He finds the house the GDA had bought in front of them, which infuriates him, but Donald tells him it was for his family's protection. Nolan tells him he has always been pathetic and crushes his spine. Donald tells Cecil that it had been an honor and blows the house up. Debbie and Cecil watched the house blow up from the GDA. Debbie realizes Nolan will find Mark and says that she does not know what he will do. Cecil tells her that they needed to find Mark before Nolan did. Mark runs into Eve and she realizes that she would be helping him today. The Mauler twins are mad at Robot since he had double-crossed them. They fought the giant robot when Robot got a call from Cecil saying that he needed the Guardians back at the GDA with a priority level of apocalypse. The Mauler twins plot how to defeat Robot, but he was already gone. Meanwhile, William drives home when he is approached by an angered Omni-Man. William asks if he was okay, but Nolan simply asks where Mark is, since William was supposed to drop him off an hour ago. He tells Nolan that Mark has gone with Eve. Nolan puts a dent in William's car, which scares him and asks where Eve is. William tells him where, and Nolan flies off. Cecil tells the Guardians to be quiet and sit tight until they are called. Rex is desperate and says they need to know what was happening, which Black Samson agrees with. He asks if Robot can find out, but Robot does not respond. Rex hits the robot on the head until they are approached by the new robot. He presents himself as Rudolph Connors, saying the robot was simply a drone he controlled remotely. Kate asks how they could know he was telling the truth, and Robot says they could ask him anything. Rex asks why he looks like him, but Robot tells him to wait. The GDA found that Mark was flying with Eve, but also saw that Omni-Man was 6 minutes away from Mark's location, which worries Cecil. Debbie asks why he could not use his teleporter, and Cecil explains that they needed to wear a bracelet and could not do all of them at once. He says they need to buy some time. Mark tells Eve what happened with Amber, which she empathizes with. He says he does not know who he has to be, and she says that the same has happened to her. She tells him that a lot had changed for her as well, and she felt she had upgraded since living with her parents. Nolan flies, but is struck down by an enormous beam of light coming from a satellite in space, which manages to bring him down and many forests, fields, and animals around him, savaging square kilometers of land and leaving a giant crater in the ground. However, Nolan soon gets up once again, resisting the beam's energy and destroying the satellite. Cecil comments that $400 billion had just been used for a nosebleed. Omni-Man went back to going after Mark and Eve, while Cecil told them he would use his teleporter. Rudy tells the Guardians everything that had happened, but Rex still wants to know why he had picked his body. Everybody thought it was wrong that he had not asked Rex first, but Monster Girl realizes that he had done it for her. Rudy explains that Monster Girl was slowly getting younger and he was trapped in a mechanical tomb while she was stuck as well. Monster Girl goes through everything Robot has done and says that she needs time to process it. Black Samson calls the Guardians and tells them he knows why they were on high alert, and they see a video of Omni-Man destroying the satellite. Mark and Eve hear the explosion, and Eve tells him that they should call Cecil. He tells her that it was not their problem anymore, since she has run away from Rex and being a superhero. However, she tells him that she did not ignore the world when it needed her. He says that the world was fine without him, but she tells him that he should do something to help and leaves. Meanwhile, Nolan is shot at by Cecil. He tries to grab him, but disappears just before Nolan grabs him. Nolan tells him to keep out of it, but Cecil says that he could not do that, asking why he had killed the Guardians. He tells him that he never needed their help since they were weak, but Cecil points out that they had been his friends as he had once, and suggests that there had to be a reason. He tells her that Debbie deserves an answer, and tells Nolan that he has fooled her and all of them for 20 years. He asks Nolan if Mark knows, which worries him, but Nolan realizes Cecil was just wasting his time. When Cecil leaves, Nolan is attacked by Sinclair's cyborgs, who put up a fight with him as he tries to get them off. He fights the monsters and rips them apart. Cecil, D.A. Sinclair, and Debbie watch Nolan's fight in horror as he starts ripping the bodies apart. Agents also tell Cecil that Eve and Mark are moving towards Nolan's location, which worries Cecil. When Nolan defeats the fallen soldiers, he places the camera inside their guts, which makes people at the GDA retch in disgust and makes Sinclair furious. The Mauler twins comment that Robot was a dick as they try to bring the immortal back to life. One of the twins mentions that even Cecil could not bring him back to life, but the other tells him that Cecil was an idiot, and the immortal was not called that for nothing. Nolan faces another monster on his way to Mark, which he tells Cecil he has defeated already. Cecil, however, told him the monster now felt no pain and was now juiced up with every drug, enhancement, and upgrade available. 2 news helicopters went to Omni-Man's fight. The Guardians say they should help, but Cecil tells them to stay where they are until he tells them to move, because if nothing goes well, they would be their last hope against Omni-Man. Rex is confused, but everybody confirms they heard what he did and they remember what had happened to the Immortal. Nolan fights the monster, while Debbie tells Cecil to call Eve's phone since she was with Mark again. As they flew, Eve told him that she was glad she came to help, but he told her that he was only there to make sure she did not get hurt. Mark saw Nolan being crushed by the creature and raced forward in order to help him. As Nolan was about to be eaten, Mark punches the creature and sends it flying. Eve gets called by Debbie and asks what was happening. Nolan awoke and Mark happily told him it was about time they teamed up together. When the creature rose, Cecil tells Eve not to help them and get to Guardians HQ. Mark and Nolan had a hard time with the creature. Debbie tells him to call it off, but Cecil says he could not do that since Mark could be allied with his father. After that, Debbie mentions that was why she had always hated him, which Cecil sympathizes with. The Mauler twins finish working on the Immortal, who does not immediately wake. He is hit many times and is suddenly being brought to life and remembering everything that had happened. He wakes up, furious, and is controlled by a collar. The Mauler twins tell him to murder Robot and the new Guardians for them. However, Immortal rips the collar off and asks where Omni-Man is, which they do not know, so he flies off. Mark asks why the monster is tougher now that they are fighting it, and Omni-Man tells him that there were many things he did not know since Cecil had sent it after him. Mark tells him that maybe he could explain after they killed the monster. Cecil is told that a new object is approaching Omni-Man's location, turning out to be the Immortal, who catches up to him and immediately starts pummeling him in blind fury. The surprised Omni-Man quickly retaliates, catching one of his punches and callously remarking he should have stayed dead before brutally fending him off. However, Nolan worries over Mark, who is under the beast's control. Mark grabs a cable and electrocutes the beast as Nolan and Immortal keep fighting. Nolan catches one of his punches and drives his fist through his stomach again, punching all the way through him and shocking the entire world, which was watching thanks to the news helicopters. However, even once again fatally injured, Immortal sticks his thumbs into Omni-Man's eyes in an attempt to blind him. In agony, Nolan eventually manages to kill the hero once more, tirefully and horrifically bisecting him and dropping his halved body as Mark watches. An emotionally exhausted Nolan approaches his son and tells him they need to talk. Mark stares at Immortal's remains and manages to piece together that it was indeed Nolan who had killed the Guardians of the Globe. Nolan attempts to de-escalate the situation and explain, only for Mark to attack him, believing Nolan to be controlled by some form of influence. Nolan distances himself from Mark and reveals that he is indeed acting of his own accord. Nolan then takes the time to explain the truth about him and Viltrum to Mark. Nolan hadn't lied about Viltrum's existence, but had lied to Mark about its true nature. He states that Viltrumites are a species of conquest, and that they only became as strong and advanced as they are by weeding out and slaughtering the weakest among them. When only their strongest remained, they began to expand their empire to the stars, quickly conquering planet after planet. Planets that submitted would benefit from Viltrum's technological advancements, while those that resisted would be cold. However, their forces began to thin after so long, making it more challenging to conquer more readily defended planets. As such, they elected to change their strategies. Select Viltrumite soldiers would be sent to planets marked for conquest and would whittle their defenses covertly. Nolan was chosen to do the very same for Earth. He had waited until Mark had demonstrated Viltrumite powers before setting the next stage of his plans into motion. Despite Nolan's reassurance that it's for the greater good, Mark needs to take this information better. Mark cannot shake the callousness of Nolan's plans, believing himself to be another human to rule over had his powers never manifested, even calling Nolan's love of him and Debbie into question. Nolan continues trying to explain delicately how long Mark will live and how futile resisting the Earth's conquest is. Nolan then states that while he does love Debbie, he considers her a pet, a remark that sends Mark over the edge. Mark takes a firm stance against Nolan and vows to defend Earth from him and the rest of the Viltrumites. Nolan attempts one more time to talk his son down, but when it becomes clear that Mark will not change his mind, Nolan relents and the two engage. A brawl breaks out between them, with Nolan having the clear advantage from the get-go. All the while this is occurring, Cecil tracks the fight, which is broadcast in full view of himself, Debbie, and the new Guardians. Cecil orders the Guardians to remain at their headquarters, knowing well and damn well that Nolan will kill all of them if they interfere. The team objects, but both Rudy and Samson insist on following Cecil's command. Rudy hopes aloud that Mark will live up to the title of Invincible. As the fight is taken to the sky, Cecil sends out jets in the hopes of distracting Nolan and enabling priceless seconds for Mark to gain the upper hand. Mark attempts to reason with his father, only to rebuff him. The jets arrive and target Nolan, dealing no damage to him whatsoever. Nolan takes his attention off Mark and retaliates, destroying one jet. Mark rushes to the pilot's aid, saving him from a fall to his death. The pilot expresses gratitude to Mark, only for Nolan to effortlessly crush the pilot's skull to illustrate how meaningless Mark's efforts are. Nolan continues to ridicule Mark's love of human life before punching him with such force that he causes an earthquake-level shockwave upon landing in the city streets. The results of the catastrophe traumatize Mark, who quickly rushes to the aid of the people in the building he had crashed through. He desperately tried to reassure the occupants of the building that everything was going to be okay. However, his stress, alongside the structure's sheer weight and faltering integrity, resulted in the whole thing collapsing. Standing amidst the rubble, Mark holds the severed arm of a mother whom he had attempted to save from the building. Nolan shows up, and the two argue once more. Nolan attempts to blame Mark's insubordination for the loss of so many civilian lives, mockingly asking how many more need to die before he gives in. Nolan goes on about the worthlessness of human life, and, when asked if Debbie's life is just as worthless, coldly replies that it is. Debbie overhears this and begins to break down. Mark becomes enraged and attacks, accusing his father of lying, landing several blows and catching Nolan off guard. Nolan quickly recovers, grabs Mark's arm, tells him for the first time in his son's life Nolan is telling the truth, and hurls Mark into the subway. He once again forced Mark to witness complete and total carnage by holding him in front of a moving train and allowing it to hit the both of them. The train is ripped in half, and the people inside are continually minced until Nolan stomps, sending the remaining cars careening in random directions. When the dust clears, Nolan caps the event off by squishing a civilian like a bug as he reaches for his unresponsive daughter. Mark attempts to strike his father again, but Nolan does not buckle a second time. He remains unaffected by the strike and retaliates by launching Mark into the air and brutally pummeling the boy through the clouds. All the while he's doing this, he lectures Mark, coldly remarking that raising him as a human was a mistake and that the current battle is the beginning of his proper education as a Viltrumite. Meanwhile, seeing an opening, Samson orders the Guardians to head into the city and aid civilians while Mark and Nolan are in the air. Rudy hesitates to disobey Cecil's orders, but Monster Girl reassures him that he's not just a robot anymore, pushing him to follow the others. Nolan forces Mark underwater, nearly drowning the boy. Just as Mark begins losing consciousness, Nolan throws him into the side of a mountain before landing and dealing a punch so powerful that it causes an avalanche, destroying a small village nearby. Mark vows to stop his father, but Nolan beats him down, insistent on making Mark comply or killing him in the process. Nolan kneels over Mark and brutally batters him, all the while continuing his callous lecturing. However, when Nolan reels back to give the killing blow, he hesitates. As he stares at Mark's broken body, he has a flashback. In a scene from Mark's childhood, Nolan and Debbie watch a young Mark play baseball. Debbie gently confronts Nolan about his antisocial behavior. Nolan sees the baseball game as pointless, but Debbie gently confides in him the significance of sharing such moments of happiness with his family. Nolan is, at first, resistant, but seeing the excitement and joy in Mark's eyes as he manages to hit the baseball triggers Nolan's fatherly instincts. He joins Debbie in excitedly cheering their son on as he rushes to home base. Mark succeeds in getting a home run and sprints to his parents. Nolan picks the boy up and proudly congratulates him. Back in the present day, Nolan finds himself unable to kill his son despite everything he had said prior. Exhausted and unable to continue his physical assault, Nolan yells at Mark, who can do nothing but listen and weakly breathe. Nolan tries one final time to instill in Mark's mind how futile it is to save the humans. He asks Mark what he'll have in 500 years after every human Mark presently knows will have died of old age or other causes. Mark weakly responds by saying he'd still have his father. The seemingly simple response resonates with Nolan. As the seconds pass, the gravity of his actions slowly dawns on him. He pulls himself to his feet and stares at his hands, drenched in his son's blood, before staring straight ahead as if in a trance. Mark weakly calls out to his father, causing Nolan to flinch and whimper. Nolan is washed over with pained emotions before immediately flying off, leaving Earth entirely. He begins crying as he exits the atmosphere, leaving a single tear floating in space. Mark remains on the mountain, where Cecil sends a chopper to rescue him. During his rescue, it's revealed that William, Art, and Amber have all witnessed the events on the news and are devastated at the potential loss of their friend. The news reports go on to mention the extreme loss of life, only mitigated by the help of the Guardians and Atom Eve. The report expresses concern about what could have caused the attack, not knowing the true motives behind Nolan's actions. Elsewhere, the Mauler twins burn down their makeshift lab but are then apprehended by GDA agents. They briefly attempt to fight back. However, more GDA units appear, and realizing they're outnumbered, the two of them surrender. Mark recuperates in the GDA's medical bay for the next few weeks. Mark eventually regains consciousness, but is still severely injured. Debbie attempts to comfort him, but Mark is still so heartbroken by what happened that he can only cry. Debbie understands and leaves the room to give him space. The moment she leaves the room, however, she breaks down and cries, feeling the same heartbreak as her son. Cecil approaches, offering her and Mark a safety net by forging Nolan's death. Debbie is hesitant to receive the help, but Cecil insists, feeling he was somewhat to blame for what happened, as he didn't foresee Nolan's betrayal. The Guardians eventually return to their headquarters, exhausted from their rescue efforts. As the group reflects on what happened, Rex eyes the last bloodstain from the original Guardian's murder. He grabs a rag and begins to clean it, only to be stopped by Samson, who proclaims that the team hasn't yet earned the right to do so. He's met with opposition not just from Rex, but also from every member of the Guardians. Upon seeing them all willing to stand together, Samson smiles and relents. The whole group then works together to clean the bloodstain away. It has been weeks since anyone has seen Mark. William visits the Grayson household to try and find him, to no avail. He's met by Eve, who had arrived for the same reason. In the process, William inadvertently reveals he knows that Mark is invincible before Eve tells him she knows as well. The two of them lament that they know nothing of Mark's status. Having nearly recovered completely, Mark is awoken by Cecil, who commends his efforts. Mark wishes the whole thing was a dream, a sentiment Cecil openly shares. Cecil informs Mark that he's recovered well and will be released the next day. Mark pries gently for information about Nolan, but Cecil has none to give. Instead, Cecil gauges whether Mark is still capable of being invincible. He informs Mark that Debbie heard everything, and though this infuriates Mark, Mark ultimately agrees it is for the best. In all this, Cecil guides Mark into a seemingly white room. When pressed, Cecil reveals it to be a secret laboratory that projects light in a wavelength normal civilian eyes cannot see due to a chemical suppressant the GDA puts in civilian drinking water. The laboratory contains various weapon tests, a Martian head being dissected and a mortal being reconstructed, though Mark can only see all of this momentarily. Cecil informs Mark that Nolan's flown far past the solar system and his current whereabouts still need to be discovered. He asks Mark to return to duty as Invincible, but Mark is still hesitant. Cecil returns Mark and Debbie to their home and promises to be available if they need anything. Once inside, Debbie excused herself to her room, stating she was tired. Mark stares at a picture of his father and, overcome by trauma, places the photo face down. He offers to order pizza, but discovers Debbie crying hysterically in bed. Mark closed her door and left her be. He goes to leave only to be greeted by Amber and, shortly after that, by Eve and William. The three agree to go out to eat. Debbie visits Art, and they share some scotch as they reminisce and express their disbelief at Nolan's betrayal. Mark's friends are enthusiastic about his return, but their prying about the fight with Nolan causes him increasing discomfort. After he asks them to stop, Cecil suddenly contacts him, who informs him that an entity is traveling towards Earth. Mark suits up and confronts the potential threat, while Eve reveals herself to be Atom Eve. Neither Amber nor William know who Atom Eve is by memory, much to her chagrin. Mark exits the atmosphere, bracing himself for the worst, only to be met by Alan. Frantically, Alan informs Mark that a Viltrumite is living on Earth, something Mark is already aware of. He invites a confused Alan to sit down and chat, just like they did when they first met. Once Alan hears the whole story, he expresses concern that Earth may be in even greater danger now that Nolan has left his post. Alan finds it puzzling that Nolan, a Viltrumite, would abandon his duty, as it is uncharacteristic of their kind. He shares his sympathy for Mark, who has been left by his father, though Alan candidly admits that fatherhood is a complicated topic for him, since he never knew his own father. Additionally, Alan explains that the Coalition would be interested in Mark, especially as they plan to lead a rebellion against the Viltrumite Empire. Despite the overwhelming state of affairs in the universe, Mark feels a sense of relief as he realizes that his personal struggles are part of a much larger cosmic event. With that, the two begin discussing their plans for the future. At one point, Mark mentions that he wants to finish high school, prompting Alan to question what high school is. On a devastated alternate Earth where Mark sided with Nolan, scientist Angstrom Levy escapes through a mysterious portal. Meanwhile, on the main Earth, 1 month after Nolan's departure, Mark continues to struggle with his father's betrayal while performing his duties as Invincible. Cecil appoints the revived Immortal to succeed Rudy as the Guardians' leader and adds a new hero called Bulletproof to their ranks. The Maulers escape prison with help from their version of Angstrom, who tasks them with building a device capable of transferring the memories of various alternate universe variants of himself to him so he can use their collective knowledge to advance Earth's technology and save other planets. Cecil sends Mark to stop the Maulers as they begin the process, forcing Angstrom to use his multiversal powers to summon variants of the Maulers who nearly kill Mark against his wishes. Angstrom stops the transfer prematurely, causing an explosion, which one Mauler, Mark, and a horrifically scarred Angstrom survive. Driven mad by his variants' memories of their versions of Invincible and Omni-Man, Angstrom vows revenge on Mark and escapes. While graduating, Mark defeats Doc Seismic and his Magmanites. Over the summer, tension grows between him and Debbie after she realizes he is only continuing his work as Invincible and working for Cecil to avoid Nolan's legacy. She confronts Cecil, during which she learns Donald is alive, and later has a breakdown over continuous reminders of Nolan. After converting a vacant lot into a park, Eve argues with her father, believing he cannot accept that she can help with her powers. However, the park collapses due to being built on unstable ground, though no casualties were sustained. The stowaway Martian, who had taken the place of astronaut Bruce Livingston, becomes inspired by original Guardian member Martian Man to become the superhero Shapesmith and join the current Guardians. After encountering and defeating the new Darkwing, Cecil assigns Mark to appease the Atlanteans for original Guardian member Aquarius's death. Amidst a trial by combat, Mark battles a kaiju, but is injured by its roar. Nonetheless, he saves the Atlanteans from it against Cecil's orders. Meanwhile, in an alternate reality, a mutated and vengefully embittered Angstrom arrives on an Earth where another evil Mark is placed in a reinforced metal shackle bond by the alternate GDA. He asks Mark questions about his current predicament, unaware that he is giving information on how to defeat his own alternate selves once and for all. The GDA agents, along with different versions of Cecil and Donald, arrive to stop Angstrom, but he does not come for a fight and merely leaves, leaving the evil Mark hysterically demanding his presence to return. Meanwhile in space, Alan the alien discusses his findings from Earth with the coalition of planets. Descending from the planet Europa, his world was attacked by the Viltrumites, and his species joined the coalition to help stop the Viltrum Empire. Bred to be the strongest of the Unipans, Alan's role is to evaluate planets for beings powerful enough to challenge the Viltrumites. He explains Mark's defiance and Nolan's abandonment of Earth. While others remain skeptical, Coalition leader Phadus supports his findings, believing they now possess an advantage. Afterward, Phadus reveals to Alan that he believes that there is a mole within the Coalition and tasks Alan to find it. Later on, Alan is confronted and brutally attacked by 3 Viltrumites, but when he is rescued, Phadus secretly sabotages his recovery capsule. While Mark attends college, Debbie joins a support group for late superhero spouses, but is shocked to learn an acquaintance she made is the husband of the late Green Ghost. She later reveals she is Omni-Man's ex-wife and leaves in shame. Mark meets a shape-shifting insect-like alien from the distant planet Thraxa, who tells him his people are in danger and asks for his help. Against Cecil's orders, Mark travels to Thraxa, where he unexpectedly reunites with his father, who serves as the Thraxans' ruler. Nolan greets Invincible, who is frozen by his sudden appearance. He emerges closer to Nolan, both closing fists. Nolan, believing he is looking for a fight, is instead hugged by Mark. However, both argue as Mark refreshes Nolan's memory of their last encounter. He leaves, but Nolan successfully pleads Mark to return. As they enter the interior of his palace, Mark learns of his father's new wife, Andressa, whom he kisses in front of Mark, and then their new child, much to his shock. Understanding his son's feelings, Nolan nonetheless asks for his help in protecting Thraxa, but 3 Viltrumite soldiers arrive. As he takes Andressa and her son to safety, Mark learns from her that Nolan truly regretted his actions and loves him. The Graysons defeat the soldiers, but are grievously wounded. Nolan is subsequently captured and taken back to Viltrum to be executed, while Craig, a high-ranking Viltrumite general, tasks Mark with finishing Nolan's original mission of preparing Earth for their invasion, or else they will destroy it. Meanwhile, Debbie accepts that her relationship with Nolan was a lie, stops accepting his income through Cecil, and throws out his books. Elsewhere, Donald discovers evidence of his death. Suspicious that he might not be human, he stabs himself in the forearm as a test. Initially relieved to draw red blood, he then notices that he has bent the knife's tip. Following the Viltrumites' attack, Mark spends 2 months helping Thraxa rebuild before returning to Earth with his brother. Meanwhile, at the GDA, Donald confronts Cecil about his body. Cecil reveals he successfully recovered Donald's brain and placed it in a robotic endoskeleton. The Guardians discover a Martian ship bound for Earth, prompting Shapesmith to reveal his identity and the impending Sequid invasion. After Eve recommits to heroism with Rex's encouragement, Cecil recruits her and Mark to join most of the Guardians in thwarting the invasion, but they are overwhelmed. Concurrently, remaining Guardians members, Rex, Duplicate, and Shrinking Ray, confront the Lizard League after they capture a military base to ransom its nuclear missiles, resulting in Kate's apparent death, Ray getting devoured by Komodo Dragon, and Rex losing a hand and then getting shot in the head by King Lizard. In the post-credits, Alan recovers from his injuries despite Phadus ending his life support and has become as strong as a Viltrumite. Phadus reveals he is a rebel Viltrumite and tasks Alan with recruiting Mark to aid the Coalition against the Viltrum Empire. Rex survives being shot and defeats King Lizard before he and Ray are recovered and treated for their injuries. The Guardians narrowly escape the Sequids and rescue the real Roos. Debbie decides to raise Mark's half-brother and names him Oliver. Despite her suspicions of Cecil, she accepts a nanny he hired to help take care of him. Rick recovers from being a reaniman, but remains traumatized by the ordeal. Mark and Amber's relationship becomes strained when both realize the toll that Mark's work as Invincible has taken on their lives. Eve's feelings for Mark begin to resurface. While Amber speaks to Eve, Mark talks to Rosenbaum, who reveals that Nolan previously wrote several unsuccessful sci-fi novels, which Mark learns potentially reveal Viltrumites' weaknesses. He relays the information to Alan, who tells him about Phadus and the Coalition's stand against the Viltrum Empire. In space, Nolan is in a Viltrumite asteroid prison with many other undisclosed prisoners. Craig, along with 2 alien guards under Viltrum commands, comes to Nolan's quarter and orders him to return to the Viltrum army, but Nolan says nothing. Craig then grabs Nolan by throat, asking why or how 20 years on Earth changed him. Craig leaves, claiming the care for Earth and the people is very toxic and unstable for a high-ranking Viltrumite like him. Bruce Livingston returns home and cleans up his apartment, berating Shapesmith for not only abandoning him on Mars, but also wrecking his home. He retches upon seeing old Chinese food and throws up in his sink. Unfortunately, he notices something emerge from the liquid. A single sequid from the spaceship from Mars once again attaches itself to him. In another universe, a four-armed tailor helps put on a suit for someone, revealing to be Angstrom, no longer wearing a dark cloak. He now transports himself to various other universes and back to the current one, looking at the city and claiming he feels good to be home. Mark and Amber attend a comic convention, but Mark leaves to help Rex. After Cecil puts the Immortal on temporary leave, Rudy returns as the Guardian's leader. Donald discovers that he has died numerous times and that the original version of him ordered the memories to be erased. Nonetheless, he later overcomes the trauma while dissuading Rick from committing suicide. While on a date, Mark is confronted by the Viltrumite Anissa, who tries to remind him to have Earth ready to join the Viltrumite Empire. When Mark abruptly leaves to save a cruise ship from a sea monster, Anissa joins him and effortlessly kills it, saving the passengers. Despite proving Earth's weakness, Anissa fails to convince Mark to complete his mission and grievously beats him before ultimately sparing him and leaving to report back to Craig. Amidst this, the Viltrumites confront a passing Alan, who fakes defeat and allows himself to be captured. After breaking up with Amber, Mark is then called by Angstrom Levy, who has taken Debbie and Oliver hostage in their own home. So Mark arrives back at his house to find Angstrom holding Debbie and Oliver hostage. Invincible does not remember Angstrom's identity at first, to which Angstrom replies he knows his many duplicates in each of his dimension and his actions that damaged his brain. Mark recognizes Angstrom's face and concludes that he first saw him on the night he fought off the Maulers before the machine's explosion. Angstrom retorts back at Mark by accusing him of ruining his goal, just as he throws Debbie and Oliver aside. Angstrom challenges Invincible to fight him, only to trap Mark in an unknown dimension. As soon as the portal closes, Mark discovers he is surrounded by intelligent raptors who are amazed to see him. Mark warns the raptors not to eat him, to which the raptors are amazed at his ability to speak as well as fly. One of the raptors even tries to defend Mark as the others try to eat him until the portal opens, allowing Mark to return home. Mark arrives to find Angstrom holding Oliver, amazed by his color and his existence as Oliver does not exist in other realities. When Invincible flies to him, he is caught in another portal. In an alleyway, a man with spider powers is fighting a man with tentacles. That's when Invincible comes through a portal to their universe. Back at Grayson House, Angstrom is irritated by Debbie lying to Oliver that everything will be okay. He then transports Invincible, who apologizes. Mark apologized for not remembering his name, but did remember the night of the harbor, that he tried to save him. Angstrom, on the other hand, denies this and transports him into another reality. Angstrom then starts to have post-traumatic stress disorder, true to the Maulers' words. Invincible travels through multiple realities, and Mark then sees a portal appear and decides to wait a few moments. Angstrom sticks his head through the portal until he sees Mark surge towards him as Mark pins Angstrom against the wall in his own dimension. Mark tells Angstrom to call off his attack until he sees his mother's split wrist. Mark becomes enraged and attacks Angstrom, and he also begins to directly fight Invincible. They then arrive at a wasteland with skeletal remains of buildings. Angstrom tries choking Mark, who pushes him across the wasteland. Angstrom still plans to destroy Mark and his family for good, until Mark reaches his breaking point. He unleashes his full powers against Angstrom, sending him flying into air and expressing how much turmoil he went through and how much he held back his powers, until Angstrom crash lands against a rusted beam, and Mark then beats Angstrom to a bloody pulp, vowing that he will never let anyone like Angstrom attack his family. Mark then finishes the battle with a double fist blow on Angstrom's chest and stops to breathe. He notices the blood on his hands and looks at Angstrom's battered body. Mark then lets out a horrified moan and laments himself by saying, "I thought you were stronger." As the Graysons' house undergoes repairs, GDA soldiers and Cecil Stedman arrive to check on Debbie and Oliver. Stedman promptly orders medical assistance for Debbie's broken arm. Meanwhile, Mark grapples with the aftermath of killing Angstrom. He's caught in a spiral of self-doubt and psychological turmoil, questioning the righteousness of his actions and suffering a minor mental breakdown. In the Viltrumite prison, Craig brutally pummels a restrained Omni-Man in preparation for his execution. Following this, Craig instructs 2 soldiers to return Omni-Man to his cell. Omni-Man requests to walk to his cell under his own power, a request the soldiers reluctantly grant. During this, he encounters Alan the alien, who is also imprisoned. Hours later, Mark is still wrestling with his conscience. His mind is a whirlwind of self-reproach as he contemplates the weight of his decision to kill. Just then, a portal opens above him, from which alternate versions of Atom Eve, Monster Girl, Bulletproof, and Robot emerge, accompanied by 2 others. Eve transforms the blood on Mark into his casual attire. Robot then creates a portal back to Mark's own timeline. As Mark prepares to step through, Eve confesses her love for him, a revelation that Rex disapproves of due to its potential impact on the time stream. Mark steps through the portal, returning to his own world. Back in his timeline, Mark goes to the Pentagon to check on his mother. Seeing Debbie safe and unharmed, he is overcome with relief and breaks down in her arms. Later, Mark finds solace on a rooftop, reflecting on his actions and the consequences of killing Angstrom. Stedman reassures him that he is not his father and that he did nothing wrong. At the Guardians' headquarters, Robot admits to Monster Girl that he wants to address her de-aging issue and apologizes for his own past mistakes. She accepts his apology and, in a turn of events, asks Robot out on a date. He agrees, marking a new chapter for both. Meanwhile, in the mountains, the Immortal discovers that Kate is alive and staying in his cabin. She apologizes for faking her death as part of her retirement plan, explaining why she did what she did. Elsewhere, 2 explorers named Jane and Riley unearth the tomb of Kahor. Jane, the daughter of Zaim, and Riley, a minor superhuman, find Kahor but quickly learn that he requires a male body to escape. Jane challenges his sexist demands, and the situation becomes even more complicated when Invincible, flying by, inadvertently triggers a sandstorm, trapping them once more. In the sky, Mark flies over Earth, haunted by memories of his father, Omni-Man. He recalls moments from their past, including Omni-Man's belief that Mark would eventually become like him and outlive everyone he knows. Mark makes a stop at Upstate University, intending to talk to Amber, but hesitates and leaves without making contact as he doesn't want to endanger her life again and felt it was time for him to move on. Back at the Graysons' home, Debbie observes as their house is restored to its original condition. She instructs April to prepare Oliver for bed. That night, Mark sits on the rooftop and is joined by Debbie. They reflect on the profound changes in their lives. Mark is uncertain about his future and his place after college. Debbie encourages him to consider the value of further education and to strive to be better, especially after the ordeal with Angstrom. Yet, Mark was resolute in quitting college in order to focus on his disciplining himself. Mark then flies to the teen team hangout and catches up with Eve, who lovingly hugs him right away. The two talk, and Mark almost shared what he learned from her future self, but decides to wait another time. Eve acknowledges that he shouldn't suffer so much. The two then stare at the city as she does her best to comfort him. In the Viltrumite prison, Omni-Man and Alan the alien communicate telepathically. Omni-Man expresses his shame over his past actions on Earth, believing he deserves death. The season finale closes with Omni-Man's poignant admission that he misses his wife.